Namaste. Welcome to Youth TV Show. In today's episode, we have a very special guest from the United States, Dr. DEE AKER. She is the director at Joan Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice, University of San Diego, California. Career Counseling Center has an objective that whoever comes to us for mentoring succeeds in life. Today, our counselor will be sharing her own experiences and will talk us through a very vital topic, career in peace, justice, and conflict transformation.
Peace and justice in many ways is a new field. If you look around the United States and elsewhere, it's not been that long since there have actually been academic programs in this. The reality is, though, it's ancient. One of the things we do at the Institute for Peace and Justice at the University of San Diego, besides having a master's program in this, is we actually document the stories of women in particular who've stayed in countries in conflict and who have actually worked with peace, justice, conflict transformation in those societies. They don't get credit, they don't get recognized, but their work is now informing what we're teaching. So we're able to actually document, tell their stories. Conflict is going to be with us for a long time. There is this cycle of conflict that we talk about in our field that it's so easy to get trapped into. It's really become important for us to think about what are the exit points? How can we get out of having just conflict after conflict, situation after situation? The Institute for Peace and Justice specifically looks at the role of civil society in actually transforming what's been conflict. If we always leave it up, if we're going to have a negotiation meetings, if we're going to have some kind of negotiations, conflict, we'll call it conflict transformation, we're going to end it, we only invite the guys with guns, it's not likely that we're going to come out with some kind of solution that actually makes a difference. So part of our job in this work, in this field, is to think of the different ways to get the voices of those impacted by conflict to the table. I can happy to tell you some of my experiences with people in conflict and negotiating, mediating, and what we do in the field. But let me hear your questions first. What would you really like to know about the field?
Can you please tell us what conflict transformation is all about?
Conflict is not always bad. I mean, conflict is part of who we are. It's, you know, it's the stumbling over the rock. If you had a conflict with a rock, you're going to move that rock, you're going to build a path, what are you going to do? So it's not automatically negative. So transformation means you change it to something that's useful and powerful and present. Conflict, if we just leave it as that, if we talk about that cycle of conflict I was talking about, it is that continual wheel. We will get back if we don't deal with the issues, our ability to speak to one another, to hear each other, to actually work on real issues, whether it's environmental issues or something. Transformation is, everybody's always in conflict. You have to find a way to deal with transforming that. Our transformation oftentimes involves bringing people who are very desperate and different together to look at a solution, because it takes both of them. Nobody in this room can actually end a conflict or do anything by themselves, I hate to tell you. I mean, it just doesn't work that way. You have to have partners, you have to have people, but you can transform it from something violent to something useful.
Is human rights connected with conflict transformation?
One thing about the field of peace and justice is you have to have values. When there are 10 points that I use when I'm teaching in a classroom, but one of those points is there has to be value and dignity in the other person. So that you have to see that, you have to feel that, otherwise it's not going to happen. So you have to be aware of that.
What is your strategy regarding upliftment of women who are victims of conflict in Nepal?
There are a number of organizations that we work with in Nepal who have specifically looked at the cost to women. I mean, even if it's not conflict, even the recent crisis with the earthquake, there's an increase in trafficking of women. And so there has to be a way to bring the local society in awareness about what can be done, how that can work. We work with a number of organizations in Nepal. They're taking the lead. We just give them support. I've brought, over the years, lawyers, women lawyers who work with women's rights to talk about, you know, how that might be handled with the Constitution. I've brought in women peacemakers from Sri Lanka and the Philippines who are dealing with the same issues on the ground because their countries are in conflict. So the idea is to create a space where people can think about the real cost and change their opinion. You can't just go up and say, stop abusing women, or stop the war or stop. It doesn't work. You have to somehow create an environment where people can see, without being threatened, an alternative to the violence that they're caught in. And particularly for women, my experience is that women have, in Nepal, been quick to speak out and organize. I mean, even recently with the constitutional issues, women said, hey, that's not happening, right? Let's go back. We got to go back to the drawing board. We had a plan. We had demands. Let's make sure that they get in there. So I think it's their own energy and giving support to them when they need that support.
You've just talked about having a good listening skill to study the subject. So what are the other prerequisites that are required to study peace and conflict?
One of the things about this new field is, depending on where you study, whether it's in England or the United States or in Australia or in Thailand, they have a program there, or a lot of different places, certain programs will emphasize different things, but they all emphasize international relations generally, understanding the basis of international relations, understanding conflict histories, understanding how to communicate with people who are very different. And a lot of the work that in our school, for example, in the Peace and Justice Masters program, people will make a choice a certain way through that they're going to go into a particular area, like human rights. Human rights is important, but you also need to understand what they are, how they work, who you're going to go to if people don't have them, who you're going to bring into your partnership. Other people might be concerned about the medical conditions. I mean, if women are being trafficked, what's their condition when they come out? Before you can do anything with those women, you have to take care of them. So who's going to be your partner? Who's going to help you create an environment that you can actually deal with their struggles and then get them a voice in the process? One of the interesting things we've done here in Nepal is with a particular group of formerly trafficked women and prostitutes, is create a space where they could talk to parliamentarians about what they think needs to be in the Constitution. It was a fascinating meeting. But it did show that if you bring the people into the room, there's just a whole new level of understanding. But what specifically would depend on what your own interests. I mean, some people have different skills, different interests, but you can usually work them into the field.
How to approach legally when people are emotionally broken down during the conflict?
Are you thinking of a specific group when you say this?
Actually, I'm a law student and I really want to know how...
Okay, the legal dimension. Okay, I understand. In my experience, when I work with lawyers in this field, it's because they have the expertise and can represent the voiceless. For example, I work with a man who's done several presentations before our Supreme Courts on the rights of different people, both indigenous people and foreigners who've come in as immigrants or asylum seekers, etc. So the understanding that he has, my friend, is the whole legal framework, but he understands it in the context of a real human being, and his presentations are outstanding. He's been very successful.
Would you like to share your experience working in this field?
I mean, I've worked in a lot of different countries. I've worked in Uganda and Cambodia and other places. But probably one of the most meaningful stories to me was in Uganda when I had an old woman at the bottom of the stairwell. She had been totally affected by the conflict, and she had no place to go. And at the same time, the country was trying to create a constitution. They had elected constitutional assembly members. And I had just gone down to the riverbank, and she looked at me and she said, "Mama, who's going to tell my story? Who's going to fix my life?" Because she's just one of the victims, right? She's one of the people that's caught in this process. So I presented her and her story to the local politician, and they actually put in the Constitution, in that particular case, a statement for seniors and elderly people and assuring that they had the dignity and process. And so in that way it was really simple. I have dealt with, but for a short story, I think we're just...
After looking over the decades of wars, that may be Indo-Pak wars or even Gulf wars and African civil wars, we see that there is greater need of peace, justice and conflict transformation in the present world. So how can we make this subject expanded throughout the worldwide, or maybe in the African countries or even the Asian countries like ours, rather than just centralizing it in US and Europe?
My experience suggests that it is happening. For all the things that you see in the news, I mean, within Africa, within various countries, there are individuals who are actually studying this. I mean, at the Own Peace and Justice Masters, our school, we have 5 Nepalis who have a master's in peace and justice studies who studied with our school alone. That doesn't count Notre Dame or all these other schools. So there's a rising community out there of people who are getting skills, experience, a vision, understanding the challenges and the conflicts. It's hard though. I mean, it's because there are so many people who don't have the opportunity to see that, and the patience can't be lost by the people who choose to work in this field. It's really rewarding, but it's sometimes slow, it's sometimes challenging. But I promise you, it's not all bad out there, and there's some amazing people if you choose to go into this field to work with.
Is this subject about bringing a conflict to an end, or is it just about addressing the conflict victims?
Okay, is it bringing a conflict to an end, or is it about just addressing the conflict victims? In this cycle of conflict that I talk about, most people are often on an edge of potential conflict, according, well, it's even in the family, right? A mother and a father can be kind of tense and almost at each other for a number of reasons. But in the larger world, when that happens, when we have 2 groups who really see things differently, they mostly survive for a long time together. But at a certain point, something happens. Somebody's child gets killed. It may not be the fault of the other group or not, but it just sets off a whole explosion of events. So then violence begins to explode. We have victims coming into the picture, more and more people. And as this cycle continues, it's full-blown war in a lot of cases. But at a certain point, there is the potential, both through peace builders, peacemakers, through local people who simply want an end to the war, like the women peacemakers I mentioned, to suggest an alternative way. And people begin to look at their problems. So if that impacts the victim, at that point you can actually deal with all those people who were damaged in the war or who've been caught in the process of the war. Now what happens next is you either go back into a cycle of conflict, because at this point where you've actually looked at the victims, where you've actually looked at the conflict, that is a point in time at which, if you bring people together really committed to ending the conflict, they will choose a new path. That's when you have to bring in the businessmen, the lawyers, the teachers, everybody who's been living in these communities. They have to have some investment and think of a different way to do things in the future. If you do the same stuff, if you just go back to your own homes, okay, we have peace, let's go home, it will not, in the long run, ever work. It never has, and I don't think it ever will, because you haven't changed something basic in how people see one another and the kind of respect they have for each other. And that includes the victims as well as the perpetrators. So there's a certain point in time when we really need everybody to be peace builders and peacemakers.
We just see about conflict all over the world, blasting, just like there is conflict between Korea, South Korea, North Korea, China, and Iran. There are different kind of conflict. Many Nepalese people are also facing about that. And does this conflict transformation somehow coordinate to minimize this?
If I understand the question, these global conflicts that are erupting, and it's even more than that, another area that we work is on the violent extremism, religious extremism that's occurring. You're using religions as an excuse to do violent acts. So that's another project that we have at the Institute for Peace and Justice. But what you don't hear about in the world, and the reason we do some of the work we do, is the things where people work. One of our women peacemakers is the woman who started North and South Korea's Sunshine Policy. The person who opened the doors so that people could go back and visit their families and begin to create space. News is interesting. Me, I was a journalist for many years. The pressure on journalists to just bring us the negatives is pretty significant. So getting the stories and telling the stories, that's all of our job too. Well, peace builders have to tell those other stories about what works, how do we get out of this, what's going on with young people in China and Nepal, what's the relationship there, what's the potential for that, how does that work? So it's not an automatic, it's just that we're constantly bombarded with these images of negativity. But some of them really are. This whole issue of violent extremism is extremely difficult, but what we've been able to do lately is to talk to young people who were attracted by the violence. They were frustrated, they were angry young people who didn't feel the world paid attention to them. They went into some of these extremist movements, but they found that there was not something there that was in any way fulfilling. And they came out at great expense to themselves. It's very dangerous. Most people cannot leave once they join one of these groups. But they've come out and they've become incredible spokespersons. And if you look online, you can follow some of these people who are coming out and talk about how young women get drawn into this now, of joining these violent groups. All of these things. Because those people are really smart. They saw what attracted them. And they're working. And that's a positive story because they're actually working to give people more information, especially young people, so they aren't tricked into this, fascination with violence.
Besides knowing the solution, there are very few steps taken by the conflicting parties because of ego, emotion, and so on. So, are there any psychological way to shape their minds for conflict management practically?
What a great question. Yes, let me tell you a little story and I'll let you interpret it, if this is true or not. So, the little story is about a mother and a father and 2 kids. And the mother has to go. She's joined this group. She's going to go out to a little meeting. And the father is left to take care of the kids. He says, well, I can handle this, this is easy. So as soon as the mother leaves, the children come in screaming and yelling at each other in total conflict, the boy and the girl. I mean, they are so angry and just won't stop yelling. And he's saying, what's the matter with you? What's the matter? And they're fighting over an orange. And he said, why are you fighting on the orange? I mean, he said, just stop it. Just they continue to scream and yell and punch each other and real violence, right in his own house. So he grabs the orange from the kid, he cuts it in half, gives each kid a half. Then they really started screaming. I mean, you could hear them at the neighbor's house. I mean, they were totally devastated by what happened. Well, the mother walks in the door and she's looking at this chaos, right? When she walks in the door, what happened here? What's going on? Why is this like this? And the little girl said, Dad cut the orange in half. I really needed all the peel of this whole orange. I really had to have it because I'm making a cake and I need for a friend. And the little boy said, I needed the orange. I need the whole orange because I need all that juice. So-and-so next door is sick. I was going to give him a whole glass of orange juice. So the mother takes the orange pieces, she cuts off the peel, gives the little girl, gives the juice, gives the boy. The point of the story being, father did not understand, didn't ask why, didn't understand the process. So a lot of conflicts actually are like that. You can be fighting over oil in the ground, you can be fighting over a million things. In some cases, that's the actual process. So in its simplified form with that, kind of remember that when you hear somebody yelling at each other. If you can get under and find out what it is they really want, sometimes you really can make that movement.
Do you think an individual must be a graduate of peace, justice, and conflict transformation to bring the greater output?
Absolutely not. The question is, do I think that people should, have to be this field? No. Every field is important. That's why I work with lawyers. That's why I work with doctors. That's why I work with people who have other skills, business people. I mean, it really takes a community who's aware of what we do, who will let us share some of our skills with them, and then they'll go out and do the work. It's not going to be a few people who do peace and justice. It's going to be they're connecting with people who want peace. And in every community I've ever been in, there's a real underlying sense of that. But there's just a fear that they don't know how to get it, that it's really going to be hard. And I think our job, people who do my work, is to get those people in a room and talk about it and share experiences and show them. But they don't have to change their field. I totally respect everybody I work with who comes from a different field, who's interested. If you feel the passion, if you feel the need to do something, I don't care what your major is, we can work together. We will find ways to make whatever you do and know as valuable or more valuable than what I do and know. I was just curious, how many of you are in law? Good, because I need to work with lawyers. We need your help. How many in business? That's the biggest missing part of what people engage in, for business people to understand and to see that they have this major role. I mean, I've conducted several roundtables here in other parts of the country with local businessmen because they didn't see that they had value in this process, and they're extremely valuable, so that's really exciting.
Making career in peace, justice, and conflict transformation is maybe the probably best, but how can one be benefited at the present materialistic world?
That's a good question. So in the world that does not value, you're saying, necessarily this kind of work, this social engagement, this commitment to doing that, I think there are several levels to that. One, there are people who value it. They're just never heard. So we have to, first of all, begin by recognizing there are people who really need some kind of peace in their life. They can't go on. They can't develop economically. They can't do anything if they're totally tied up in this conflict and the way it's been. So it's one, recognizing that. Two, to get into the room, the people who haven't thought about it before. A lot of times, or here in Nepal over the years, I've had the privilege of bringing businessmen into a round table and talking about peace and justice, and they're kind of holding on to the chairs, and what am I here for? But in talking about it a bit and giving them the access and giving them a greater vision and having their voice begin to think or present what they think is possible in building peace is really helpful. At one point we worked with laborers, armed police force, businessmen in relationship to a problem down in the Terai. And they got invested in solving this problem and coming back even to Kathmandu and the parliament for a solution to something that could be solved that was causing a lot of pain and a lot of heartache and misunderstanding. So the thing is to step back, get the bigger picture. Who has to be in the room? Who has to recognize that the real advantage is when there is peace? Certainly for businessmen, barring extreme corruption, but certainly for businessmen, there's a real value to having a place to work.
What an individual can do from their behalf for a conflict transformation, like as in being independent?
It's a really good question. What can the individual do for conflict transformation without going into the field, without taking a degree in peace and justice, etc.? First is to really listen. What are people frustrated about? What is causing the tension or the conflict? It's a great skill. I mean, it's a skill that we actually have to learn for the most part, just because we're used to being able to talk rather than listen. So we have lots of benevolent tricks in my field to get people to actually listen to one another. First is that. Then, seeing their value, the history, the conflict, no matter how different, no matter how angry, no matter what that other person or that other group of people did, actually taking the time to find out what it was underlying their anger, their frustration. Doesn't mean you agree with it, doesn't even mean that they're right. But understanding that is really essential when you bring people together, or when you're talking to people to try and prevent further conflict. And believe me, the greatest peacemakers in the world are not necessarily so labeled. They are people who pay attention to other people and work with them and create some space where you can actually find out what's happening with one with another. And it works all over the world. It's not a thing, it's a way of being in the world, of listening and respecting the other.
If you need further counseling regarding academic choices and career choices, feel free to visit us at Leadership Academy Career Counseling Center, which is open to you every Sunday and Wednesday. For registration, you can call us at 01-4257-250. Our mobile number is 986-1155-900. You can email us at leadershipacademyktm@gmail.com or visit us at facebook.com/leadershipacademyktm. Thank you for watching. Namaste.
Thank you. Namaste. Thank you very much for coming.